This video demonstrates the calibration and setup procedure for Mitutoyo Laser Scan Micrometer. A few things worth noting to begin with is the readout is powered on with a key in the ignition switch. This is the sending and receiving unit. There is a shield over each of the laser openings. This is the work stage, and there are of course a couple of V-blocks and also the calibration artifacts to go with them. So first things first is, while I'm getting set up, I'm going to go ahead and turn the key to the on position. I'm going to let that readout fire up, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of the components here. First up being this low calibration block. So you can see that this is marked low calibration block, and it does have a little recess in that V. That is for this low calibration artifact. So the low calibration artifact is this little guy here, and you can see the small pin that runs across the top is the actual artifact. When you install this into the block, you'll notice the recess there is where this will fit down into, and when you install this, you want to make sure that the pin at the top is perpendicular to the receiving unit so that it is shooting across that diameter. So now that I have this installed, I'm actually going to go ahead and place this on the work stage here in just a minute. Before I do that, I'm also going to show you this high calibration block, again marked high calibration block on the V block. This is the high calibration artifact. When I install this, I simply just rest the journals on the V and let that diameter fall down into that slot there. So those are the calibration artifacts and the calibration V blocks. I'm going to carefully install my low calibration block first. Does not matter if you install the low calibration or the high calibration block first, or where you put them along the rail. What's important is that when they're on the rail, you do lock them in tight with the thumb screws. So I'll go ahead and install each block. Going to install the low calibration artifact into the low calibration block, and the high calibration artifact into the high calibration block. Now the first thing I'm going to do is use this hand crank to lower the work stage to the lowest depth. That's just a good practice to get into. And I'm also going to open up the magnetic shields for the laser for the sending and receiving unit. Now that I have opened up the lasers and placed this at a low depth, I'm now going to unscrew my thumb screws for the rail, which allows this to move back and forth. And I'm now going to start with the high calibration block first. So I'm going to slide this to make sure I am in front of the sending and receiving unit. I can get a good visual on that by looking over top or from behind the sending unit. I now know I am on that diameter. I'm going to try to get that as centered as possible, and once I've reached that desired location, I'm now going to lock that rail in place with the thumb screws. At this point, I'm ready to raise my work stage. So you'll notice that there's currently no reading on the display, and that's because I am not at the proper height. Once I reach the proper height, I will see a reading pop up on the display, and I know I'm getting closer to where I need to be. So what I'm going to do is continue to raise this work stage until I reach the max reading. So right now I'm at 60 millimeter, 3 to 4 microns. I'm hovering back and forth, and I'm going to get that at the largest reading possible. Eventually I will dip down to a much smaller diameter once I fall off that high side, and it looks like 60 millimeter, just a touch over 5.5 micron is going to be my limit. I can also tell, looking at the light indicator here on the left, I have one at the top, one at the bottom, which means I'm pretty well centered for my artifact. I am now getting 60 millimeter 6 micron, so I am continuing to grow. I'm up to 7. And you can see I fell off there. So I've now reached the max diameter, which is showing 60 millimeter 7, almost 8 micron. My artifact has a certificate at 60 millimeter 5.5 micron. So since I'm doing the high calibration, there is an HCal key here on the readout. I'm going to press the HCal, key in my value of 60.0055, hit enter. Once I hit enter, the input value will blink a couple seconds, the readout's going to freeze, and eventually it's going to recognize that value input. Keep in mind we are in sub-micron here and I'm not in a lab environment, so we are going to see those last 2 digits flicker back and forth. Now that I've calibrated the high calibration artifact, I'm going to move on to the low calibration artifact. So the only thing I need to do is loosen my thumb screws for the rail. That's going to allow me to move the rail. I'm going to slide the rail to the point where I am in line with the low cal artifact. I'm going to make sure that that pin is perpendicular to the laser. And while I was doing that, I was also making sure I was in line with the sending and receiving unit. Once I reach that desired location, I'm going to lock the rail in place with the thumb screws. I do not need to raise or lower my work stage at this point for the low calibration artifact. My low calibration artifact is calibrated at 999 microns. So now I'm going to press the low cal button, enter in my value of 0.999. Again, I'm going to hit enter. It's going to pause for a couple seconds, read that value, show it on the display. Again, sub-micron, not in a lab environment, but it is holding our value of 999 microns. At this point, the laser scan micrometer is calibrated, so I can use the thumb screws to unlock and remove my V-blocks and my artifacts. I'm going to carefully take out each artifact as to not damage or misplace those. And go ahead and remove those V-blocks. There are additional V-blocks provided if you will be using the V-blocks to locate the part. In this scenario, we are going to be using the centers. So I'm going to make sure that my thumb screws on my rail are nice and snug, so that's not going to move when I try to install my part. Now I'm going to take my part and locate this between the centers here. I do have the thumb screw adjustability for the centers to increase or decrease that distance. And I'm going to get some positive pressure here on the center, lock that thumb screw in place. Now moving forward, I should be able to pull out this spring-loaded center, and that allows me to load and unload the part as I get into my more rapid checks. Now that the part is loaded, I can unlock my thumb screws, and I can now slide this back and forth along those diameters to check the different diameters along the shaft. This was a quick video on how to set up, calibrate, and use a laser scan micrometer.